Okay, well, welcome everybody. Let me go ahead and do a recap of the solar news. And one thing I thought I'd mention before I go over these, I don't know if you guys find the same value in this, but I've really found it helpful by sort of scanning the news every week and doing an update. It kind of gives me a sense that there's not something out there that I've missed, that something's not, some foundational thing in the industry is changing. So, hopefully you find this helpful as well. Okay, so 19 governors have just sent a letter off to the Department of Commerce, to the Biden administration, saying they want the government to speed up their investigation of Chinese panel manufacturers. This is a bipartisan effort. They're saying it's causing a major disruption in the solar industry. And at the same period of time as this happened, then the Department of Commerce announced they're going to go deeper. They're going to do a deep dive into 6 or 8 companies specifically from these countries in Southeast Asia. So to remind you what this is all about, there was tariffs imposed on Chinese manufacturing of panels. So the Chinese moved their panel manufacturing to several countries in Southeast Asia, and primarily Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. And now the government is saying, hey, maybe you did that just to get around the tariffs. It's like, duh, you think? So anyway, the preliminary findings on this is supposed to be coming out August 30th. And the final report not until January 26th of 2023. So in the meantime, because there's this threat of major fines on these companies, there's been a lot of disruption in the sale of products from these companies that represent about 80% of the solar panel manufacturing. So for instance, if you're a distributor, you don't want to place an order anticipating there is no tariff that's going to be imposed on these panels. And then by the time it arrives, there's a 50% penalty or something on the purchase of these panels. So that's what's been disrupting it. It's all the uncertainty about what kind of fines and tariffs the government might levy retroactively upon these panels. So that's a big issue. There's a lithium ion recycling plant that's just opened up in Arizona. One of the issues with lithium ion batteries, of course, has been the difficulty in recycling. So this company called Li-Cycle, L-I, Lithium Cycle, they're going to open up a second plant in Alabama in the fall. Each of these plants is anticipated to recycle about 30,000 tons of lithium ion batteries each year. And the output, it's an interesting thing. They refer to it as black mass. If you look at it, it looks sort of like a shredded Brillo pad of some sort. And it's essentially the materials within the lithium ion batteries. And from this, they can extract lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese from this black mass. When I did a Google search on black mass, it was a lot about devil worship, but I don't know that that's exactly what they're talking about there. Okay, solar module reliability scorecard came out. It's produced by a company called PV Evolution Labs. I guess they're a testing organization. And what they found is 12 manufacturers actually receive top performance ratings on every single test. They do a lot of different tests on these things, on the physical structure, the hail resistance or resiliency, some things like thermal cycling, which I hadn't really considered as an issue before, but in a lot of environments, in a daily basis, they're basically saying, we're going to take this panel from minus 40 degrees Celsius to positive 80 degrees Celsius over a relatively quick period of time and cycle it several times to see how much degrading there is in the panel. Because in some places it can be quite cold at night and then quite hot in the day, like in a desert environment. So that does degrade the panels. So they found 90% of the modules degraded less than 2% because of this stressful thermal cycling. The panels that rated best in theirs, astroenergy, I always want to call that astroenergy, but I guess it's astroenergy panels, Boviet, ET Solar, HHDC/SPIC, never heard of them, HT-SAAE, hadn't heard of them either, Jinko, Longi, Q-Cells, Ryzen Energy, Seraphim, Talisons, and Trina Solar. So if you're interested, I know, Ben, you just got a shipment. Were any of those in your reliable panels there?
They were actually REC Solar, and REC, I've been reading about them, and they've got some kind of a cell structure that, if you read about their, I don't even know what they call it, but it keeps from degrading over time. So at 25 years, they're still 92% producing.
Okay.
But no, they're not on that list. They're built a lot like a Q-cell. They remind me of the Q-cell panel.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there's what is it? There's a, I know I'll get it wrong, but there are a number of these degrading factors as the industry gets a little more mature. There's different ways that the panels degrade. Some is just sort of a constant rate over time, but many of them are in the initial couple of months of operation, where most of the degrading of the panel that it's going to experience over its lifetime is going to happen. And so it may be that they've dealt with that, so they don't get an initial spike. There are a couple of new products out there on the market. Mango Power has released their residential energy storage systems. They've got a 10 kilowatt hour and a 20 kilowatt. They also have a portable lithium ion, that can be charged either from electric outlet, from panels, or from a EV charger. And that's a 3.5 kilowatt hour. Don't know what market they're going after on that. Schneider Electric just announced they're going to be selling the Square D Energy Center Smart Panel. So this is a service panel, the circuit breaker box essentially, but that is smart. It's tied up to your cell phone, so you can manage loads, monitor loads on a circuit by circuit basis. And I think we're going to see a lot more of these, because this is going to be meeting the California requirements that all residential installs, all new installs must be battery ready. So they must be able to support batteries starting January 1st of next year.
That Square D panel you just described, is that similar then in structure or makeup to that span that you talked about a few weeks ago? It was a smart panel where everything was integrated.
Yeah, I think so. The pictures of it, and of course that's all we've got at the moment, look like that. And there's just a lot of electronics contained within a traditional circuit breaker panel. And then of course it would have to have some sort of Wi-Fi device built into it as well to communicate. SunPower just announced that they're going to start selling solar and storage systems at the residential level through IKEA. So the IKEA stores are going to start carrying a selection of solar from SunPower, and they join Sunrun and Vivint, who are currently selling through Home Depot. So we're probably going to see a lot of these kind of, it seems to me, I read somewhere that the Home Depot thing hasn't worked out all that great. Probably it's a hit or miss, because there's no really strong nationwide franchising of solar that you can get the same consistent quality, outlet by outlet. It's kind of dependent on the individual. So we'll see how that develops. So anyway, so that's the news that I have for this week. Any comments on any of those items before I turn it over here to Ben, who had a question for everybody?
Well, Lowe's has been already selling solar systems.
Are they?
But they got nobody, they have nobody in there who knows anything about it, and they're very small.
Yeah.
So it ends up being a problem.
Yeah. Well,
And I
of
read in
course,
the paper.
Harbor Freight will
Yeah.
sell you some.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, if you want to put
Well,
it on your
and
bicycle.
Home Depot, when I've just randomly searched for things, Home Depot comes up in the list of hits, but they don't have anything in stock. It's not like you can go there and look at anything on the shelf. They'll sell you a kit. They'll have it shipped to the store. So I don't know. Lowe's may be similar. Like you said, they've got nobody that has any training in it.
yeah.
The one they've got in the store is for electric fences.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we
Believe it or
get
not.
those from Tractor Supply as well. Yeah, I think that's going to be a big problem because these things are still so customized that it would be hard for it effectively. You know, I know that Tesla tried to do that idea of let's come up with 3 or 4 standard systems, and then you just select which one you want, which seems like a reasonable approach for most people. But of course, Tesla hasn't done a very good job of supporting that because they've subbed it out to the lowest bid. And so you get some shoddy workmanship and some, you know, installers who aren't that great. Yeah, Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, when you guys were talking about the Harbor Freight one, is there something wrong with the Harbor Freight one?
No,
Just out
nothing
of
wrong.
curiosity.
No, well, we just like to tease Harbor Freight because I always say it's good enough to last until you get it out of the parking lot. You know, that's just sort of the
Okay.
quality of, but their things are kind of toys. You know, they're not real. They're fine if you want to play around with stuff and maybe
Mhm.
take it on a camping trip or something. But for the most part, they're just going to be small, thin film products that, you know, they're fine to play around with, but they're not a residential grade home system. You know,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, all those people that you're talking about going in there, they install for you also. They're just not selling solar panels, they're selling the whole systems.
Yeah, like at Home Depot, you mean?
All of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's affecting price because in the last 2 years in our area, and I'm going through CET, Green Tech, 20% to 25% increases over the last 2 years in prices. And also the availability is way down.
Mhm.
So you don't get much choices. So I want a 410 panel. We only got 370s, sorry.
Yeah.
And so, and to try to get anything under $3 a watt in this area is priced out. I mean, I could give up profits. Maybe I should give up my profits.
Well, I could see that if you're buying, you know, the traditional way that this industry has worked, and we say traditional, the industry is only a dozen years old or so effectively, is that if a salesman goes out like yourself and you sell it, you build in your profits, you build in your marketing, you build in all of that. Well, if you're going through a Lowe's or an IKEA, clearly they're wanting a cut from that process because they're bird dogging the folks in. And so that's going to add whatever layer they've detected. So if you have to pay them 10% or 20% or who knows what it is, then you'd have to jack up your prices 10 or 20% to hit that, you know. So I can see
And-
there are certain people that's not an issue for.
And
But
50% of the people selling here are brokers. They're not licensed. Maybe they find one guy and pay them some money to rubber stamp their jobs and stuff like that.
mhm.
And I have a friend who goes out and sells solar, and he quoted a price, and they said, well, Joe can do it for $1,000 less. So he called up the boss and says, yeah, take $2,000 off. So they come in price so high that they can afford to do that. And second, they said, yeah, we got some really cheap panels here, so we'll give you that.
Yeah.
It's a jungle. It really is.
Yeah,
If
this
I
is,
were,
go ahead.
if I were, if I were trying to develop a market, what I would basically do it at a big lot store is basically sell only ground mount systems. I'd have a variety of sizes, and I might or might not anchor them with weights, and I'd have just a small product, but I could sell that and I could standardize that, as opposed to trying to design a roof mount system, trying to design a system that I had to worry about shade and everything. It would be a niche system, but it'd be a pretty big area of someone who wanted to come in and say, what size system do I need? They say, well, here's how much I can give you. If you got a place where we can put it, we'll put it on the ground. All we got to do is just run some wires to your house.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
That
it
would
all
work.
brings up, the conversation brings up the issue that, again, this is a new, young industry that just hasn't found its footing yet. And each of these things hopefully will evolve, but I think it also points out that there's probably going to be a pushback at some stage with a lot more legislative oversight being thrown on top of the industry. I always like to say that here in Ohio anyway, if you want to do somebody's fingernails, you got to get a license from the state. But if you want to install solar on their home, you just got to get a pickup truck, you know? So it's, there's a bit of unevenness in how things are monitored and legislated at the moment. Okay, Ben, let me throw it up to you. Speaking of questions here about solar, give your situation, see if anyone has.
I was going to ask you something real quick about the IKEA thing first.
Sure.
In that IKEA, I saw similarly that they were doing that, but I didn't read the article. Are they going to sell full systems or design systems, or are they just selling parts and pieces? Did you get any of that out of what you
Now,
read?
my impression was it would be a soup to nuts kind of thing where they'll probably bring, you know, I guess it would be like some of these stores will do a whole kitchen kind of thing and whatever. I guess you'll sit down with a person and they'll design the system for you. So I think it's a soup to nuts kind of thing, the install and the bits.
Because IKEA's whole model is they give you a cardboard box of stuff, you take it home and put it together. And
Yeah.
one of the things I think about with all of the situations you guys are describing is that's all great to put up some solar panels, run some wire to the house and have something there, but then you have to interface it with your panel and potentially the grid. And that's where things really start to get messy, and you need people that know what they're doing, or people end up with fines and penalties. And
Sure.
so I just wonder about that whole part, if they're trying to keep them away from tying into the grid, or if they're permitting that grid connection.
Yeah, that's beyond the article anyway that I read. So it'll be
Okay.
interesting to see how people address that issue, because
Yeah.
I mean, we can say the same thing for electricians. You can go down and buy parts, but if you needed to install a complete electrical system in a house, in most jurisdictions, you'd need to have sort of a permit and a license and things like that. So there's probably room for both, you know, where you can get bits somewhere, but also then get access to someone who will do the whole system for you.
Yeah.
So I saw an installation that was on a $500,000 house at least. And it had all this conduit run on top of the roof.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering how you calculate factors when it goes under solar panels and over roofs. And I'm looking at it and counting, how come they got so many panels? And then I noticed that they put all the panels on the north facing roof.
That's somebody who did not get good advice, I would say.
Or their housing development won't allow it to be seen from the street. I've seen that where they're
this is
really
facing the
restricting
street,
what's
north.
visible from the street, and they make you put your panels, if you want them, you're gonna have them in bad places.
Well, that's where community solar comes in, and you just simply purchase from a larger system elsewhere and allocate it to your home. All right, well, Ben, why don't you
Okay.
jump in with your other thing?
All right, so I ordered parts and pieces from Northern Arizona Wind and Sun, and a semi truck showed up last Monday, and the solar converter was perfect and pristine, and the pallet with the panels on it looked like somebody had taken a forklift to it. And what it looked like was that they had stacked other things on top of it, or something had fallen off of something onto the panels anyway. We got the panel pallet on the ground, and their policy is everything has to be opened up right away, noted for damage. So we took the cardboard off. All the panels are scratched. I didn't unstack the entire panel set because it was apparent from the outside that everything was at least scuffed, scraped. So everything's damaged. But I personally filed the claim with the freight carrier, and because the freight carrier, the driver, was helping me get things documented at the time of the delivery, and so I got the claim process started. Well, since then, I've learned that I should have called Northern Arizona Wind and Sun, and they would have done the claim process. But in the meantime, now I'm dealing with both the freight carrier and Northern Arizona Wind and Sun. At least the
So-
top panel is completely destroyed. It's been punctured through the PV material. The panel below it is scuffed from all the broken glass and the scraping, but everything is, scratch and dent at this point.
My experience would be you go back to the supplier and it's gonna go back to the FOB point, freight on board, and
Mhm.
let them argue it out. Because if the freight on board's from their plant, then they're responsible. And if the freight on board is at your location, then it becomes the truck company responsibility. But that's up for them to argue, not you.
Well, the problem is I filled out the claim report and actually filed the paperwork that day. So I don't
Get a-
know if
Get a
that's,
copy off to the supplier.
I did. They've got
Okay,
a
that-
copy.
Yeah, because it's gonna come, like I said, what's the FOB point?
Okay.
Have they
Because-
indicated it's going to be problematic for you, or are you just curious if it's going to be?
Well, I'm nervous about losing money in one part of it. I'm also nervous about all the extra time they're going to expect me to invest at no compensation, or that they're going to expect me to take some of these panels that aren't damaged enough to return and say they're fine, they'll work for you fine. Because my attitude is they got here from Singapore and they were fine, and now they're scuffed and scraped. And so at least if I'm going to take some of these panels, then they should come at a discounted price, or take the whole pallet back and send me brand new panels that aren't smashed, and then I'll be fine. But Northern Arizona wants me to take the panels all off of the pallet, take pictures of every one of them so that they can determine which ones need to be replaced and which ones are okay. And I'm like, that's a lot of my time. Who's compensating me for that?
Nobody,
So
nobody will.
in my case, I get the truck deliveries with solar panels on it. I know from my experience in business that if I sign for those panels, I own them at that moment, good, bad, or indifferent. And they invoice me, the computer invoices me immediately. So before that, I literally have the truck driver unload each panel, and I stack them on another pallet using the spacers provided, and I inspect 100% of them. The 40 panels, it may take us an hour and a half to do it. Then I open them all up and I inspect it, because you're going to have to do that eventually anyway.
So the truck driver helps you do that?
Yeah, and I won't sign for it until I see everything is good.
Okay.
And if he calls up, see, that's the other part of it. I work with CED Green Tech, #1 distributor. They just got bought out by Enphase, so that's a different story. But if you got a good distributor, they're going to work with you, because they don't want their name to get out there that they're selling crap. So, but they give me a hassle. I says, all I want to do is inspect the stuff before I sign it. And then when I find things wrong, I says, I will not take that, put it back in your truck and take it back to where you take it. And I cross off and I put down what I signed. It's great hindsight. And I learned that lesson in hindsight. And that's all I do now. And I'm belligerent that way. And but it's a lot of money, you know?
Well, and that's one of the things, hindsight, I wish that I would have just refused that pallet, said, no, I don't want the pallet, take it back. I didn't realize that was an option I had. Everything that I had in the information that they had given me was that when this shipment comes, you need to inspect it and mark that it's damaged. If it's damaged, there was no option C where you can actually refuse the pallet and put it back on the truck. It was,
Right.
if I'd have known that, it'd have gone right back on it. Said, get out of here.
They don't tell you option C because it's easier for them if you accept the pallet and then go by them one by one. So they only have to send you 3 panels.
Right.
And that's
Well,
what, that's
And
what
I'm
I've
just waiting
learned.
for the Biden administration to come to Bend and ask for their taxes because the Singapore company was actually owned by a Chinese subsidiary, knowing how this thing's going.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, I know they're broken panels, but they were made by Chinese owners. So Ben, sorry, you're gonna have to cough up like 50% of the cost there, buddy.
Well, and if you're doing what Bob is suggesting, which of course is really a good thing to do if you've got the time and the drivers willing, you know, but we always recommend taking a multimeter and sticking it on the terminals as you're doing that, just to see if there isn't any hidden damage, because you should be getting about the same voltage reading, you know, for each panel if you're looking at them in the same environment, because some of the damage might be hidden where, you know, there's not a connection that's made properly inside. So you just stick that multimeter. It's if you're getting 47 volts, 46 volts, 42 volts, you know, and then you get a 3 volt, you know that there's something wrong with that particular panel. And, you know, it may not even be visually apparent.
Well, that was what I explained to Northern Arizona when I tied them on the phone, was that I was concerned with all of the bus bars that are in these newer panels, that there are so many points that just from flexing those panels, they were obviously crushed. So, you know, just from all that flexing that they would have had to withstand, whether it broke the glass, whether it broke anything, what internal damage for these things that are supposed to last for the next 50 years and at 25 years still have 92% function. I mean, that's a pretty big promise. And then you're going to smash them.
Yeah,
And
and each of those panels should have 3 bypass diodes. And if any of those diodes are damaged, you're going to lose a third of the production from the panel.
I was involved once going over an article asking the question, can the United States afford the aesthetic looking electronics? And after the bottom line was, yeah, aesthetics is what you got to base your logic on most of the time. And statistically, you're going to be good. If it looks good, it's going to work good. If you have all the panels working good except a couple, I'd rather deal with a couple bad ones and exchange them out than a whole load. So
Yep.
Aesthetics is everything.
Don,
Jay-
you had a question?
Question to your earlier point, as far as the hidden damage, whenever I accept a big pallet like that, I always write concealed damage. And that way, even if there's something I haven't found yet, when they leave, that covers you with the freight carrier. I think that was one of the, I think Renview is the one who suggested that I do that whenever I accept a delivery from them, so that'll cover them with the freight carrier. So if you've got this issue where you've got a pallet of panels and you have or you haven't taken them off, or if you have, you find out later that the modules have been damaged, that'll cover it, or at least it'll give you a better argument.
You're saying just note on the bill when you sign for it, you know, pending any concealed damage that might be apparent?
That's what it means, but I just say concealed damage and just move on from there every time I sign the invoice or the shipment invoice. Yeah.
Yeah, because
How
I think
quickly-
it's good if you can get, as Bob says, get the guy to stay, but he may be more persuasive than I am with truck drivers, you know.
I'm going to tell you, this driver has an order from his boss. You don't leave until they sign for the packing slips that they have received it.
I will say a lot of times they don't sign for packing slips anymore. I've had it the last 2 times they've come, they said I don't have to sign for stuff, not just solar, but other big things.
Yeah. Well, and me living in Appalachia, I actually had a truck driver who wouldn't cross the bridge to come over to our house. So I had to meet him down in the parking lot of a pizza place and unload it from his truck to my truck to get it, because he wasn't going to take his truck across the bridge. So,
I've seen that too.
yep.
With steel, yeah.
Yeah, you're in Kentucky. I know. We're
Yep, we're in the hills.
So
Okay.
Don, when you mark everything damaged like that, how quickly do you have to go through everything to make sure that you've inspected?
I'll usually do it the next day or two, and I'll do,
Okay.
as Jay said, with a multimeter and check all the panels when I do that. So I won't let it go for weeks, but the
Okay.
idea is, same as Jay, I'm not as persuasive as Bob is either, that I can't, or sometimes I'm not there to have the guy just sit there for an hour or so as I go through every panel.
Oh, I forgot to tell you one little point. I actually slip them.
You slip him $20. You froze, Bob, but I know you're from
Hey.
Chicago, so I already know the answer.
Yeah.
How much did you slip him?
I don't slip anything to anybody, and I'm not a communist.
Okay, that's for anybody who's
Yeah.
listening, right?
You conveniently froze right before you gave us the amount.
Yeah. Okay, well, hopefully, Ben, that gives you a little bit of guidance, but I suspect you're in the world of consumer beware kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's going to be a pain. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Okay, anybody have anything to bring up before I jump into some of the topic of the day?
I read an article this morning that the federal government has 300,000 buildings that they decided they're going to put film on the windows and more in solar, and they're going to put solar positioning devices in the buildings. It's a
Ah,
multi-billion-dollar project. That's a huge project.
yeah, well, the federal government is the largest purchaser of stuff. So,
That's 300,000 buildings they're going to do. So that's a lot of work.
yeah. I think we just saw where the infrastructure money is going. So, because they sure haven't fixed the bridge that the guy wouldn't drive over down in our neck of the woods. So, okay, let me get into some of the different types of storage, because as I was working on this textbook, I ran into some interesting details, and we've talked about this in some of the past meetings about storage on the grid. And we often get some interesting ideas. I know, Bill, you brought up, and I've got a picture of it, that battery or that gravity tower storage device. And we've talked about in the past hydrogen and flywheel storage and things like this. And I was just kind of curious as I was looking at it, if it's a real thing, or is it just a theoretical thing? And so I did a little bit of research. I have some numbers here, but let me see if I can share I have some pictures here. Okay, can you all see that picture of the storage of the
Yeah.
lakes? Okay,
The two
so
lakes, yeah. 3 lakes.
yeah, so this is a pumped hydro system. And so pumped hydro out on the grid, these things have a lifespan of about 30 to 60 years. They have a very low energy density, but they're very efficient. So essentially what happens, this hydro power plant over here, if they have excess energy that's not required, they'll take water and pump it up to this reservoir. And then during periods when they need additional power, they can then allow gravity to flow down through this, this power station, and essentially have 2 power stations online when they have peak load demand. So when we talk about storage on the grid, it's essentially about 95% or more of the current storage on the grid is this form of pumped hydro. And there are about 43 stations operating in the US currently, representing about 23 gigawatts of stored capacity, or essentially 2% of the power demand that at any time is backed up by energy storage. So I found that kind of a fascinating statistic, to think that our entire grid has a total capacity of about 2% storage. Now, when you look at some of the projections over the coming years, they anticipate that the storage on the grid will have to increase by 5-fold, which would take it up to about 10%, by the year 2050.
Jay, is that
And-
2% for how long though? When you say 2%, yeah, that's a rate, I'm assuming you're saying, but is it 2% for a day? I mean, how many megawatt
Yeah.
hours, so to speak?
Well, they're anticipating that this pumped hydro typically has a discharge life of about 12 hours.
Okay,
So I reckon that's going to be a 2% for 12 hours.
Okay.
I'm making that assumption. It wasn't specifically stated. Now, what's interesting is this 5-fold increase will not come from pumped hydro. Today, almost all the storage is pumped hydro. So in 30 years, we'll be looking at storage that pumped hydro is 1/5 of the storage capacity. They're not really anticipating any additional pumped hydro going into the system. So what will be this new storage device for the grid? And from all indications, it's going to be almost 100% lithium ion batteries, primarily short term. So that gets to your point, Don, about they're saying that in the initial phase, it'll be 2-hour to 4-hour battery backup. And then you'll start looking at that expanding to 10 hours, which is what they consider fairly long-term battery backup on the grid. Now, compressed air is another thing that we hear about periodically. And in all the articles, they make it into a thing where you can take the air, compress it in an underground cavern, and then release that pressure to run a turbine. When you look into it, there's only one in the US, in Alabama. And that was built in 1991, and they haven't found it efficient enough or economic enough to build a second one. So even though it's often listed in the alternatives for storage, to my way of thinking, it's not really a thing. And in fact, this one unit down in Alabama only has 110 megawatts of stored capacity. So that's option number 2. Option number 3 is molten salt. So this is another concentrated solar where they take the mirrors from the sun, concentrated on the tower in the center. It will heat up to about a little over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point they melt salt, and that molten salt becomes an energy storage system. This process is about 80 to 90% efficient in taking the energy of the sun and converting it into energy. Again, another problem is there's really only 2 developers in the United States who deal in this technology, and both of them are effectively bankrupt. The plants have never performed as expected. And I couldn't find out if there were any more than just this one in the United States. This one is located in Crescent Dunes, Nevada, right near, what is it, Area 54 or Area 51 or whatever it's out there. It was probably alien technology or something. So it's again, not really a thing, even though it's often touted as a thing.
Now,
They
I
have learned-
understand how the first 2 work because they're spinning turbines, but in this one, what is the actual process here? Because it sounds like it's a phase change where they're melting the salt, but then what?
Well,
When
then
it
when they
releases
need,
the energy,
when
it
they
goes back
need the
to
power,
solid?
yeah, when they need the power, they can then take that molten salt and expose it to water, which creates steam, which then generates a turbine. So it's basically a heat storage process that.
So it's still a steam-driven turbine then?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
it is.
Don't
Now,
they have one or two of these in Spain that are working?
Yeah,
remember-
in Spain, they're thinking this is a thing, this is a technology
Yeah.
that has legs. In the US, it's not. I mean, it's just not been. And oftentimes with these kind of technologies, it comes to the point where you say, yes, this will work, but compared to the alternatives, it's an expensive option. So
Mhm.
why would we go with this instead of one of the less expensive options? So. Now, one of the things that's always touted is hydrogen. You'll hear this a lot. And those of you who know me well know that I am often not the biggest fan of the hydrogen economy. And once again, in the true sense of research, all my research backed up what my pre-existing opinions already were, which is kind of the point of research, you know, at least in today's society. Hydrogen comes in a lot of different colors. They like to term it. So there's green hydrogen. So green hydrogen is the one that people talk about, where you say we've got renewable energy. Rather than curtail the energy from a wind turbine or a solar array when that energy is not needed, why don't we use that to, through electrolysis, convert water into hydrogen and oxygen and store the hydrogen? That's the public relations version of the hydrogen economy. Then there's blue hydrogen, which takes natural gas, converts it into hydrogen, and then recaptures the carbon that is given off through that process. Then there's pink hydrogen, which uses nuclear power to, again, through electrolysis, create hydrogen from water. Then there is gray hydrogen, which is basically taking natural gas, extracting hydrogen from it, and emitting all of the CO2, which is the byproduct of that process, into the atmosphere, which is pretty much about as polluting as it can get. Because what turns out is the energy equivalent in the hydrogen is less than if you had just burned the natural gas. And in the process, you're giving off more carbon dioxide than you would have given off had you just burned the natural gas. And then there's brown hydrogen, which is the same process, but from coal. So those are all of your options. 1%, 95% of all the hydrogen produced in the United States today is gray hydrogen. So that is the taking natural gas, converting it into hydrogen, and just emitting out all of the pollutants. Sort of the worst, well, I guess brown is a little worse, but the worst of all cases. And almost all the hydrogen that's currently used in the United States is used for refining petroleum and producing ammonia. So whenever you hear anybody talking about hydrogen as a green alternative to our energy issue, just know that it is currently in its current manifestation, which has been going on for the 20 years that I've been looking into these things, hasn't changed. There's always this hope that in the future it will be green, but it's basically about the most polluting fuel there is out there in the marketplace and used to create more pollution. So not that I'm biased or anything. So
For what it's worth, Jay.
Yeah.
I was talking to one of my cousins who works for Duke. He's an electrical engineer about some of this stuff. And to Tony's point, just to know, he's not evil. He just works for Duke. He's not dumb. But his comment was, I guess when they do their continuing education, they go through all the different alternatives. And his comment was the consistent discussion about hydrogen was always, why would we ever do this? If we have, it can't run through the natural gas pipelines, If you had natural gas, you'd run natural gas through it anyway. To your point, I think that's one of these things that they keep trying to, people who would prefer it to have better environmental stuff would prefer the green hydrogen, obviously. But his comment was it's not economical. There's no realistic opportunity or infrastructure to use that in the US at the moment. And they can't imagine why it's still on the list of, I mean, maybe in the future, far in the future, it would be an option, but his comment was, we don't even have the infrastructure for it. If we had the natural gas, we'd use that anyway.
Yeah, I think it constantly comes up because there's a lot of government money that is chased after,
Fair enough, yeah.
And so somebody comes up with an idea and they say, I can get a 5 million, 20 million, 50 million, $100 million grant to explore. But as you say, the infrastructure is really tough because the hydrogen atoms are so small, they will transmute through metals, and you've got to go to cryogenically frozen compressed natural hydrogen in order to store it and transport it. So
and that's even worse than natural gas or oxygen. The energy you have to put in to do that to hydrogen is even more than those.
Yeah. Yep. Another one that's thrown out there periodically is the flywheel. And the flywheel technology is kind of a magnetic levitation spinning cylinder inside a vacuum. So super high tech, where the idea is if you can get that cylinder spinning through the initial energy that's being stored, then you can tap into that spinning energy as a generator at a later date. So because of the frictionless environment, essentially, once the thing is spinning, it doesn't take much energy to keep it spinning. And then that's power that you can draw from in the future. Again, this seems like a very high-tech solution to a problem that can be fixed or solved with a battery. So, and clearly the picture there, NASA, there may be high-tech situations that's a requirement, but it's not really a technology that's available to the marketplace today in any realistic fashion. It's again, chasing grant money, I think. The tower, this thing's called the Energy Vault. This is something that was brought up at a previous meeting there. And this one looks interesting. It's uses gravity. So in this instance, they're showing, and this is a theoretical thing. I don't think there are any of these built yet. So the idea is rather than curtail the wind turbine output when the grid doesn't need that power, rather than shut it down, why don't we use it to stack these little concrete blocks in a tower? And then when we do need the power later, you can generate it by dropping those concrete blocks down to the ground. And I guess the little, you generate a turbine through that action of those cables. So interesting. It's basically using gravity, very similar to pumped hydro, which is using gravity. It's just that you're using water instead of concrete blocks. And something like this doesn't have the same kind of footprint as pumped hydro. And then flow batteries is another item that's been out there being discussed. And a flow battery has the advantage of scalability, where you basically have these great huge tanks of electrolyte. One is the cathode, one is the anode. And the electronics in the center here to generate the power is pretty much similar, depending. The size of the battery system or the size of the storage system only varies in the size of the tanks required. So you can take a fairly simple concept and gear it up to a citywide storage device by just simply incorporating larger and larger tanks. Whether that becomes a thing, I don't know. We seem to be getting more towards distributed and smaller rather than centralized and bigger. So for a microgrid, maybe, You know, a citywide or a campus-wide microgrid with a flow battery might be the good solution. But when we look at batteries currently, according to the US government, of the batteries that are installed into the grid today, 93% are lithium ion batteries. Okay, 4% are molten sodium. And I ran out of time. I didn't know exactly what that means as far as molten sodium. So maybe someone can enlighten us later, but it's just another battery technology. It's not the same as the molten salt concentrated solar. It's a different type. The thing I did see is it said these are good in areas that have a high heat environment. And then lead acid batteries represent only today 1% of the batteries that are installed on the grid, which is fascinating because 10 years ago they would have been 95%. And flow batteries represent about 1%, and nickel iron batteries about 1%. I know nickel iron batteries are used a lot in substations, central offices for telephone services, things like that, largely because they're very robust and they last for 30, 40 years. So that was basically a recap of storage options that are out there on the grid in a very esoteric way. And anybody have any feedback on that? No? I had a couple of announcements, and I thought if people wanted access, I just get these from people periodically. Solar Edge has a battery integration tutorial. If you want a link for that, just stick it in the chat and I'll send you the link on how to get that. There's a Mid-Atlantic Renewable Association there out of Pennsylvania, I think. They're going to have an interesting presentation on May 31st from a representative from NREL, talking about what's new in the world of solar. It's a free seminar, so if you want a link for how to get into that one, I can send that one to you as well. And then there's an upcoming webinar on ultra large sized solar panels for utility installations. So if you're into that, that might be very specialized, but I can send you a link for that. So if you just want to throw that into the chat, I'll follow up with that afterwards. Okay, anybody? Yeah, Jay, you got something?
I was unmuting and such. And in your potential storage ways, water and concrete blocks, each unit of what gets given potential energy still has its potential energy. And the air storage one, isn't that limited because the Nernst equation that the entire cave is the, you're packing the air in, but every increment you take out decreases the energy of what comes out next?
That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. I don't know your equation, but it does make sense that as you relieve pressure, then the pressure becomes, the energy is in the pressure. So the less the pressure, I guess, does it decrease exponentially, or how does that work?
I don't know, but it would seem like if it's a constantly variable pressure source, whereas the water or the concrete blocks would be relatively uniform.
Yeah. Plus it'd be relatively easy to control because like with pumped hydro, you increase the flow to increase the energy, and that can be handled and controlled pretty easily.
It's just as simple as a pressure tank on a well, that you're at maximum pressure, and as you discharge off of that, the flow becomes less. So
Yeah.
you have this big cave that you've maximum pressurized, but as soon as you start taking pressure off of it, everything's losing pressure. So the work that can be done is less.
I would worry a little bit too, because when you do put any kind of enclosed environment under pressure, whether it's a pipeline or a cave or whatever, if there's any flaw in the system anywhere, it could rupture. And that could be a potential cause of concern.
I think the illustration there is not valid. Some of you may know what a cheetah tank is. that you use to inflate tires. It's a big tank. You fill it up. It's got a huge valve. All of the air comes out at one time, blows up your tire, so it seals the bead.
Oh, you have setting the bead. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So in a mine or a tank, whatever, you're going to valve down the output to meet your equipment. So when you've got a high pressure and a lot of volume, a lot of air in your system, you're going to crank down your valve so that you only bring out the amount on the drop side of your valve that runs your system. Whenever you have less pressure, you open up the valve so that you keep your flow constant in order to run your system. Your system is not designed to operate at the highest pressure of your tank or mine. It's designed to take only what you valve out, and it'll work just fine until you get down to pressure below a certain point at which a wide open valve won't deliver enough pressure to run your system.
Okay. All right, Bill, you had a comment?
Yeah, there was an effort. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, there was an effort in Hawaii, which I believe was unsuccessful to extract energy from ocean delta T. If I remember correctly, theoretically, if you have a 7-degree difference, and I don't remember whether it was F or C, between water at depth and water at the surface, you could extract energy. And I visited the place, but I don't think it was successful.
Yeah, I know that there was.
I mean, that represents a huge battery in the sense that there's a lot of thermal energy stored at depth. Cool, I guess. Anyway, that's it.
I know there was a thing in Norway that used ocean waves and compressed air. They built it on the side of like a cliff, and as the waves came in, it compressed air within a environment to run a piston turbine or of some sort. And but then they had a big storm and it blew the whole building off the side of the building. So, you know, there are downsides to these things, I suspect.
Yeah, nature's a bitch.
Yeah. All right. Okay, well, we're running up against our time. Anybody?
Jay, there's one more I was going to say. If anybody's interested in the energy market, it's not so much installation or anything, but I sent you a link for it's called Valuing and Compensating Distributed Energy Reserves. It's like a webinar with people who, you know, live in an ivory tower and think big thoughts, but they are talking about how to properly set up the market for distributed energy.
Okay, like for virtual utilities and things like that, how much to pay for them?
I either that or it's, you know, basically I was thinking more like, you know, net metering kind of stuff. Is that right? Or is it, I'm not sure what it is. I just got the headline and I forwarded it on to you.
Okay. All right. If anybody's interested, just put it in the chat here and I'll send those things out after when I'm wandering through and getting this all put together. Okay. We got one more minute. Anybody have one little closing thought? All right. Well, let's call it a day. See you all next week. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.